I'm a hybrid designer, a former engineer turned to the dark side, as you just heard. But design these days can mean 100 different things and therefore nothing at all. So at the core, what I do is think. I think, what should the world of tomorrow look like? And how can I transport everyone to this wonderful new place? My approach is rationally irrational. So I admit that the world is weird and beautiful and it's perpetually in flux. And there's no use trying to pin down something that is always reinventing itself. So I don't waste time predicting the future. I just try to create it. Now, if you want to see a hotspot of this world in flux, get your mind opened up to crazy possibilities, go check out Tokyo. I lived there for 6 months last year. And even if you haven't been there, you probably have this notion of what you think it is. So maybe it's a combination of these beautiful Buddhist temples plus the madness of Shibuya Crossing. Maybe you think there's geishas just running around all over the place, or maybe you think that there's Harajuku girls running all over the place, whatever you're into. And although these are stereotypes, you're not that far off. It is a world of contradictions, a city with multiple personalities, from the traditional to the avant-garde. You can zip across the country in the fastest maglev train on the planet, and yet paying rent still involves this monthly pilgrimage to this guy in an office carrying a giant bag of cash, and he handwrites 3 different forms in beautiful calligraphy. It's the utopian technological future that you always dreamed of if this was the 80s. And that means everything from these really busty animatronic women at the robot restaurant to the telepresence robots that are connected to Oculus Rift and have haptic feedback in the hands. So people are working on really, really exciting technology. It's just that the way it's done is not necessarily translatable outside of the ecosystem of Japan. Now, as a designer, living somewhere with all of these dichotomies is really useful because it makes you pause and notice and appreciate what you think is right with the world in addition to what you think is wrong. When we live somewhere here, like in the UK, and it is kind of uniformly technologically average, we kind of grumble that the trains never run on time, and then we don't really think too much of it. It's really easy to ignore the status quo. But when you live somewhere where you're presented with this stark difference between what you think is awesome and futuristic, and in Tokyo the trains are on time to the second and they're pristine and you can get this hot coffee from a vending machine while you wait. And then the strangeness of how this is actually accomplished, which is these attendants in little white gloves that very politely and violently shove people into the cars in rush hour. So you can kind of step back and maybe reassess your values, but also take these like very strange things as maybe potential inspiration for a totally different future. And this is important because a big part of design is about fortune telling. So most of what we do won't come out for a couple of years, maybe even decades. So we have to do a bit of guesswork, and some people get on the bandwagon for the singularity or self-driving cars or living on Mars. But predictions are hard. They are irrationally rational. So they take this tiny little sliver of what could be and stretch it all the way out to its logical conclusion in the future, except that it may or may not line up with everyone else's little slivers, once it gets there. Predictions are these straight lines, and obviously the problem with parallel lines is that by law they cannot intersect. So you're missing out on all of this stuff that's happening in the spaces in between, all the things that could be going in very different directions. You're essentially saying that the world is immutable when we know it's not. And so then if you had this feat of mathematical genius and you somehow managed to make all of these lines converge and said, okay, this is the definitive view of the future. It's sort of equivalent to taking all the tech cliches that we have, taking all those stereotypes of Japan, and then saying, look, ta-da, I made it. This is the wonderful new world of tomorrow. And it's this horrible Photoshop job that just doesn't really hang together at all. So what if we take it a different way? Let's go back to those dichotomies. The world is a mashup, it's a remix. And why don't we embrace that chaos, take all those contradictions that aren't supposed to be together and jumble them up and see what kind of new thinking that can spark. So it's sort of like that old game of pick up sticks, and you throw out all the technology and the cultural norms, and it's all splayed out on the floor in front of you. And then you can zoom in on the little intersection that you like and pull that out and hold it up and use it as a lens onto the future. So in this way, what I get to do is not make a prediction, but run an experiment, let's say, on the world in real time. I call this being rationally irrational. So it is believing in the wild things, the future that is already here, the past that hasn't left. It is believing in these optimistic possibilities, but with a little bit of skepticism. So to show you how this actually works in practice, I'll share a little bit of work. I recently finished the Global Innovation Design program here in London. So it's a joint program between the Royal College of Art and Imperial College. And the way design is portrayed to the outside often looks very clean and minimal like this. And if you have Post-its and Sharpies, that's about all you need. And in reality, it looks more like this. So this is work in progress for a project that I did with two very talented designers, Satara Shamdani from Iran and Alex Kitching from France, who is also our lovely model here. And before getting into the details, just start with a question. If you could invent any sense, what would it be? Have a think about that. Okay, I think that's probably too hard, so let's try an easier one. If you could have any superpower, what would you choose? Do you have any thoughts? Maybe invisibility? Yes. Teleporting. Awesome, good choice. But I would say, really, this is a terrible question. No, we've heard it a million times, it's kind of boring, and it's just not that relevant anymore. Superman is outdated for a number of reasons, but when we think of what should the future superhero be, it has to be a much different image. And this is one of the first decisions that our team made when we were trying to figure out what do we work on. Sky's the limit, we can do anything. And we decided that the future superhero, it's not about being bigger and faster and stronger. The superhero of tomorrow is more empathetic, more perceptive. She is skilled at communicating. She knows how to interpret the nuances of the world around her. It's about enhancing our senses, so changing from how we exert ourselves over others to how we mediate other people's influence on us. And the second decision that we made was to focus on sound. Now, sound as we know it is actually much more vast than what you're listening to right now. So it encompasses everything from the electromagnetic waves oscillating around Rosetta's comet, all the way to the vibrations in the lungs of the first animals to crawl out of the sea, and that allowed them to hear in air, or sense in air, you could say, for the first time. Yet sound is a forgotten sense. We're so visually oriented that we don't really pay that much attention to it. That said, it is so powerful that it can, unlike our sight, which is limited to this kind of small band that we focus on in front of us, our ears can take in a myriad of different sounds all simultaneously. So you're listening to me speaking, maybe someone in the back is still having their morning breakfast. Earlier we heard some amazing singing, and your brain is making sense of all of this, not only what these sound waves are, but what they mean, where they're coming from, how they're moving around. It's really quite powerful. So now we're armed with these two things. We have sound, we have sensory enhancement and superheroes. And we tried exploring and experimenting with these. So we tried what if we come up with a new authentication system based on the unique sound of you? So we recorded these, this is graphs of people swallowing water. We recorded different body sounds to see if, can we come up with something that's better than typing a password in on your computer? We tried pitch shifting sounds so that you could move all the unwanted sounds into one frequency band, essentially muting it, and then just dropping the ones that you want to hear back into the audible range. So maybe this is useful for the elderly. It might also be useful for those selectively listening teenagers that are doing this anyways. And we tried mapping 3D spaces with a Kinect to potentially use architecture as a new tool for music creation. Finally, we stumbled into bone conduction, and it's something that's been around for a while, but most people aren't that familiar with it. So the way it works is it takes this tiny little plate and vibrates it against the bony part of the body. So usually it's the skull. And those waves then propagate to your ears. They bypass the eardrum, going straight into the little hair cells, and you perceive that as sound. So it also works, in case you were wondering, if you stick one of these things on your elbow, and then you can stick your finger into your ear, and that is also quite successful. So among all of this, we discovered that if you take a whole bunch of these bone-conducting transducers and wrap them all the way around your head, you can actually induce sounds that you perceive as if they're emanating from different points in space around you. So I could take an input and put in vibrations here, and it would sound like a full jazz band playing in the back of the auditorium. And then not only static points like that, but we could do moving objects as well. You can zoom a car from one side of you to the other. So it is sort of like surround sound, except it's this three-dimensional soundscape that only you can hear. So nobody else can hear this, and it just kind of emanates directly out of your brain. And one of the people that we tried it on, he waxed poetic, and he said, It's just like the breeze on your face. You don't question why it's there, you just understand it is, which was quite lovely. And then we said, okay, why bother just doing things that you can already hear, like music and cars? We can turn anything, any kind of data into sound. It could be numbers, it could be locations. We can create an entire new auditory language that doesn't need words. So the same way that music can evoke emotions, why can't we evoke knowledge? So it is this new stream of consciousness on top of what you're already absorbing, a new layer of information that you can take in totally intuitively. And in effect, it is a new sense. So we called it Sona, your seventh sense, and now we have at least one answer to that question I asked you. So awesome, what the hell do we do with something like this? So calling it a new sense isn't just this clever bit of PR. It actually allowed our team to think far more expansively and ask bigger questions. So why are we limited to perceiving things that are only within our physical radius right here? Why can't I sense someone that's across London, if not across the world? And we know about this thing called sensory substitution, whereby we can put in information through one sense and circumvent another one. So the way Braille uses touch instead of sight for reading. If our brain is so malleable that it's able to take in input through all the wrong channels, once we exploit that plasticity, what will the new perception be for tomorrow? So imagine you're using this system, and it's kind of like a homing pigeon. So you have this instinctive internal compass of where you need to go. So on your way here, you probably stepped out of the tube station, and then you got your phone out, and you followed the little blue dot all the way here. Now, what if, let's rewind that and say, okay, you step out of the tube station, and then you just feel like maybe it's a good idea to take a left here. And then you walk for a little bit, and then you say, I think it feels right to go this way, and then, oh, that building, that looks like where I need to be. And Sona could be inducing all of those sensations, even if you're not really conscious of it. Or how about we integrate this into all of our cars? So instead of just your traditional dashboard, you could have this intuitive sense of how fast you're going and where the other cars are around you, where are the bikes, where are the trucks. So no more blind spots, no more surprises at an intersection when a car decides to run the red light, because you would have already sensed them around the corner before you could see them. Or what if we can eavesdrop on our muscles? So be physically, sensorially in tune with our bodies. Now forget the Nike Plus and the Fitbit and all of that. And you could actually feel each and every muscle and how it's performing in real time. It's kind of the ultimate version of the quantified self. And what else could this sense do that we can't even dream of right now? So the difference between a wearable like this and a medical device is just that the latter also comes attached to something that we call a disability or an illness. And just to show you how quickly things can change, it wasn't that long ago that female hysteria was considered a medical condition. You've probably seen a movie about it. But nowadays, we just call that sexual desire and get on with it. So what's to say that in a couple of years from now, we're not going to look back on ourselves in 2015 and say, what was wrong with you guys? You guys couldn't hear Wi-Fi signals as you were walking around, or you couldn't listen to cancer? You know, that could be equally insane. So a proposition like this is bigger than itself. It's saying that we want to redefine the line where the physical and the digital collide, that it shouldn't always be mediated by screens, that maybe we should get back to our very human senses and start relying on those, but make them a little bit better. It's saying that we want to change the way not only we interact with technology, but how we interact with each other. How do we get back to being face-to-face, become that future superhero, being more empathetic? And essentially, how can we be more human, but through technology? So another thing that I don't like about predictions is that they don't fulfill themselves. It is the engineers and the scientists and the designers that are kicking around big ideas in labs. These are the people that are making the future for tomorrow. And the difference between a possibility and mere provocation is that we can and we are making really awesome technology to turn all of these crazy ideas into reality. Now, to have the right crazy idea, to make it relevant, that is my job. So I embrace the chaos. I embrace this world in flux. I take a little bit of the fringe, a little bit of the familiar, add the robot restaurant and that old man doing calligraphy, and remix it all together and see if maybe there's a gem somewhere inside. Something rationally irrational that is perfect for today, for tomorrow, even tomorrow's tomorrow. Thank you.